Welcome to Surrender School, Emotional Sobriety Workshop. Chapter 6, Knowing It's Not Personal.
All right. We are now on chapter 6, Knowing It's Not Personal. Now, this chapter was a real kick in the butt for me. And I want to talk for a minute about the best way to take in the information that we're learning in this book. We really need to not beat ourselves up with this information. We are just taking a deeper dive into our character defects. Okay, we all do this stuff. And this information is just to help us grow in program. So don't be discouraged when you see this stuff in yourself and you see this in yourself and all the things that we're learning. Be excited. Be excited about your growth and excited about your recovery, because that's what this stuff is. Okay, so we're going to dive in. So Dr. Berger starts by saying that emotional dependency, what we just talked about last chapter, creates all kinds of perceptual distortions. And a big one is how we tend to take everything personally. On page 109, he says, taking things personally means we assume that the things other people say and do, or don't say and do, are about us rather than about them. But what other people do and say aren't really about us at all. On the same page, he says, taking things personally is a function of low self-esteem. Our low self-esteem makes us very focused and very concerned with the approval or disapproval of other people. So we're always looking for validation in our environment. And it's because we have low self-esteem. We don't know how to validate ourselves. So we look to others to make us feel good about ourselves. We erroneously believe we need the validation or approval of other people to be all right. This is what creates emotional dependency. We turn everyone around us into judges and juries. And this creates a state in which we are unconsciously and perpetually afraid. That is really strong. We are afraid of what others think about us because we are dependent on them for our opinion of ourselves. And that leads us to be always, at least at a low level of anxiety and fear. For me, the level was more up here. Page 111, our okayness, our safety, our very existence then depends on reading people's minds. So we read a lot more into what people say and do than they intended. Okay, so I grew up in a violent home. So being able to predict behavior was absolutely vital for me. And I got really good at seeing when the blow up was going to happen, predicting the blow up. I could hear it in a tone of voice. I could hear it. I mean, I could see it in the way that my father's jaw would tighten or the way that his neck tendons would stand out. And I would know it was coming. And then I would run and hide. So I thought that was the way to survive, was to read people's minds. And so I thought I was pretty good at it. Turns out I'm not. But I used that tool because I had very low self-esteem, and I would use that tool to read into what did they really mean by that statement? What did she really mean when she said that? What did she really mean when she did that? And I'm making, a mountain out of a molehill, and the person didn't intend any of that crap that I essentially made up in my own head. So our ability to understand what people are saying has been distorted by our emotional dependency as well as any trauma we might have suffered in our childhood. Our anxiety causes us to filter and distort the information we get from other people's words and actions. We believe the other person's behavior and attitude toward us is an accurate reflection of who we are instead of who they are. And that's what their words and actions are a reflection of, them, not us. We have nothing to do with it. Taking things personally is a tip-off that we have identified with our false self, because this false self is fragile and needs constant reinforcement and approval. So our false selves are always looking in our environment for validation and self-esteem. Dr. Berger says we have a very basic error in the hardwiring of our brains that makes us think our feelings are facts. He says our feelings are real, but they're not always true and accurate. So if someone says something to me and I make it mean, that I look like crap today, and then the emotion follows very shortly after, where then I feel like crap today, and then I feel sad and embarrassed and self-conscious. And then these feelings, I start taking them as if they're true, but they're based on a made-up thing. So the feelings are real. Yes, I'm feeling like crap, but what the feeling is based on isn't true. And it's important that we begin to tease that stuff out. Page 112, Dr. Berger then says something that is very difficult for us to accept. If someone likes you, it's not personal. If someone doesn't like you, it's not personal. Nothing anyone does or says to you is personal. Dr. Berger explains that when our response is disproportionate to the actual situation, it is an indication that we are taking things personally. When we flip out over someone not saying good morning to us when we go into the office, we know that we're taking something personally. There could be dozens of reasons why that person didn't say good morning to you, and none of them having anything to do with you. So when we wildly overreact to a situation, then the issue isn't about that specific situation. It's really about us wanting to make the other person do something that resolves our inner anxiety. My coworker didn't say good morning. This produces anxiety in me that they don't like me. Okay. And so I want them to say good morning to me so that I can feel like they like me and I'm okay. All right. That's a simple thing, but take it and apply it to bigger circumstances, and you'll see the same thing applies. The same process applies. Dr. Berger explains the reason we take things personally is because we either agree with what is being said or we are afraid that what is being said might actually be true. He says we connect what the person is saying to a wound we already have. Let me say that again. We connect what the person is saying to a wound we already have. Maybe we weren't liked as little kids on the playground. Maybe not a lot of people wanted to play with us on the playground. And so not saying good morning to us in the office touches that wound of not being liked, not being accepted, not belonging. Page 121. Dr. Berger says that taking things personally is the maximum expression of selfishness. This is interesting because we make the assumption that everything is about us, that everything that people say and do is about us. Me, I. We think we are responsible for everything. We think we are the center of the universe. And what Dr. Berger is saying here is that nothing people do is because of you. It is because of themselves. Further on page 121, Dr. Berger introduces the concept of differentiation. Differentiation is about knowing the difference between ourselves and others, about having boundaries and feeling complete within ourselves. The higher our level of differentiation, the more independent we are in relationships. We cooperate with our loved ones. We don't manipulate them. We hold on to who we are in relationships, and we do not see our reflection in the other person. We only see the other person. We're actually dealing with them and not ourselves. On the next page, 122, Dr. Berger says the individuality of well-differentiated people is developed to the point that they can be responsible for themselves and not fault others for their own discontent. In other words, we don't blame people for how we feel when we're well differentiated. Dr. Berger explains that low differentiation folks accommodate other people's needs because of our emotional dependency, not because we are being thoughtful of the other person's needs. We demand people meet our unenforceable rules, or we meet other people's unenforceable rules. But either way, we're just trying to make them do what we want them to do and to soothe our own anxiety. Next page, 123. When our differentiation is low, our sense of self is less developed, and it causes us to take things personally. The steps are such a great way to help us develop a stronger sense of self, particularly steps 4 through 9. We really take a good look at how we behave in the world, how we try and manipulate people to get our way, to feel better about ourselves. And then we learn that we're okay through this process. And then we begin to take responsibility for our behavior through steps 8 and 9 and making amends. They're really a great way to be able to do this. Page 123 as well. Dr. Berger talks about how we stop taking things personally. He says the first thing to do is to listen to our second voice. Our first voice is the part of us that reacts immediately from fear, anxiety, and emotional dependence. Our second voice is more mature, and it comes from our wise self. Another way you can look at this is it is the voice of your loving parents. The next step on page 124 is to empathize with the other person, to see their point of view. Put yourself in their shoes. What is really going on for this person? Okay, so let's go back to the example of the person that didn't say good morning to us. Okay, we can empathize with them and think, maybe they had a bad morning. Maybe their kid is sick and they're worried about them. Maybe they got divorce papers served to them this morning. Maybe they, had a fender bender on the way to work. Maybe they couldn't find a parking spot and they're late for a meeting with the boss. It could be all kinds of things. We put ourselves in the other person's shoes to try and have some kind of empathy with them. And that is a way that we can pull apart from them and differentiate them and see them as them and us as us, and their behavior having nothing to do with us. Dr. Berger says our emotional reactions are only clues about the way our brains are processing events around us. They give us clues about how we are understanding and thinking about what is going on around us. We may be so used to blaming our personal reactions on what others say and do that we can't claim our own reactions as our own. He goes on to say that we may be so used to manipulating other people or ourselves to soothe our fears that we simply can't see that what was said or done is not about us. And this is when it's really great to call your sponsor or call another fellow in program and walk through the process and see if they can help you pull it apart, tease it apart. So we practice these things, Dr. Berger says, and gradually these new practices become habit. We stop taking things personally and we gain emotional independence. And I think it's important that I reiterate here that we practice. We're going to trip and fall into this over and over and over again, and we'll get faster and faster and faster at catching ourselves and setting ourselves right. But it is a practice, and it's something that we have to do every day. And trying to stay aware of that tendency of ours can be very, very helpful in this. That's all I have today. I'll
See you next week.